second. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to our center. So, what you okay? I guess we introduce ourselves. I am Dom Cimafranca. It's Benedicto Lim Jr. You know me, but maybe you want me to know this stuff. So, yeah, this is a background. We're giving a talk on the story of our forefathers. This is a book project that we worked on. And to kick things off, basically, can say the pyramid was about transparent the period that we covered is around turn of the century until Peru partition from our 50s. So these are the people who feature of the book.
Anyway, the concept of we started this outdoor put Angola or reflected among four sects. Another soul,
Då lärde mig det där polisi där kom vad med dig men det är så shit vad kan det har jag inte
so from there we started to we consulted on the set and that way we had a good feedback. So around 2012, around 2012, we formed the first focus group discussion. So we invited were Gerald, probably the late Romanin, the late Chunli, Lannang again, and then my mother, Nancy again, and Jolly Leon, Jose. So in Donald Paul, this is a portrait. They'll Tun, Edgar, Jacob, Ahmad. They'll
supposedly lead the project. You're Nestor Ortega. He's in a way director of Nagira SCR, culture of
on that first focus group discussion, we discussed who to interview,
for year on, and the period that we cover. Then a brief outline. This was for the first day. We did make a brief outline. So we will feature the curses. Yung derived first. Of course, the Muna, the Myoto, the type of cake during the century. Then the traits contributed. Sinan contributed the most to the city. You hold, let's say, so even though protected is not hectare. The first campus, Dominque, Liberia, when they formed 1924, they stood. It was also after that, we could not donate the office. You see a law, it was not there before. No. Yeah, they opened something. So they took around 3,000 square meters. So that's why they're sitting there. Otherwise, $61 one more weeks. So you warmers to start the post, you are able to fire the Passing and E.P. Castillo. They are very nice, good publishers. Na si Casey Ateneo is and EE are connected to the Ateneo Davao College. So they were the ones who made give us the Davao area. Okay, so the first meeting we had Shun Yi, Steve Artisa. Okay. We are members of the Davao City Chinatown Urban Obviously. We were appointed during the time of the UDK. You can let's see this February 2nd. So what we have. Okay, so moving on, we started interviewing Chunti, Nelite, si Wilbur Tinte, and Anito. Getting so Zabo, she was a teacher very in Jesu. Then ni Idwa si Charlie Law is Yogi. The old elder students, they would know better. They will know that inside campus were 4 Chinese pairs. C is on E, sense of propriety, E, justice and righteousness, Yan, integrity and integrity, C, honor and sense of shame. That's the foundation of the case in some they competent for. We offer the lowest time change school was celebrate of all activities, weddings, visiting TV families, any good size patient was held here. The songs again in front of Memorial Hall. It's like an events place that time of. So, sige, events ay Davao Civic Center. Sige, hanap ako. Yeah. That's well, that's how we have spoke. It's actually it's already done. The case it's a Brahma very text. The coffee table book is done. We're into the publishing stage. We're waiting for the consequent disease by the city Heshok. It's entirely sponsored by BDO. BDO gave us the C-band to start the book, and we had it and we passed the city pressure office. Kasi being never forbid ako city channel, consider faucet over. So that's the money is so we're waiting. I think can take a little bit more. Well, maybe I'll go like this, a little CP this side. But it is okay. We're about to go to publishing. It's in the that stage. Yeah. Sige. After the interviews, we were quite confused about the line. So, must have 75. Then we did hire Miss Gerald you're familiar with Cody. Cody is one of the co-founders of the Davao Basin Laicos. No? He's the wait. Yes. Davao Institute of Davao Studies in Madras. So he's a prolific writer. He also writes for Edge the All. And he's a chroniqueur of Davao Kistik. So very educational, very informative in the Ixtaco of now and then events creation. And of course, Dom Cimafranca. Dom Cimafranca used to be with Ateneo, but his passion is really literature. And he one coming in, so both of them collaborated to write this book. I think the contents of the book, anything you want to know, you can ask it. Okay, so sige, before pass, you will sleep in most of the story. My organ is not so good, okay? And sometimes I like sleep practices like, yeah, the background. Jude is actually my uncle. He's beating, my wife is Chrissy's. That's how I did that. That's how we got. My own background is not in history, the writing. My own background is IT, so I am good mostly in copy. But I did take the Cinema Writers Workshop in 2006 in Lannang, the global literary world. My old background is at studies, so Davao. But normally, when you talk about the global Chinese community and literature books, normally that's basically what it's given. But anyway, because the students that write these my passion, and part of the work that that was part of the Davao Writers Guild, and one of my biggest, one of the achievements I'm proudest of is we've been running with Writers Literary Journal for the past almost 20 years starting. Okay, so we're collecting stories. We're collecting stories from all over Mutant Law. Okay. Yeah. So that maybe that little project also showed the importance of writing down this song. But he gave opportunity to write the history of to look into the history of the Chinese, which for me was, before I started this project, was really quite a thing. And part of that is actually because of, we speak with our grandparents, and then the stories are all disjointed. See, why? In some way, believe that maybe our grandparents were mostly bashed with some people on some of the stories of you. But why are they moving back? And so that's why my first hurdle was actually the difficulty in piecing this. In fact, England is the first grasp of the story in it's really individual stories, right? So it wasn't until I started editing the text that things started to talk again. Any period, it's important to look at the Chinese and Davao as part of the larger history, the larger framework of the experiences
of Davao, which is in many ways distinguishes us from the Chinese in other Lannang, the other, because Davao was basically frontier land. I mean, Cebu is established 1500s, 1500s, 1600s. Okay, Manila, roughly the same time. Davao was not really established until the late 1800s, going into the 1800s. So Davao is essentially frontier land. It's important to note also that the Chinese in Davao initially came in as migrant workers. Right? In kami natin, going to the first graph, it's always about mentioned. That is the same but the reality is, our forefathers replicated were Kamla. Right? So, in other words, in other purport, is police. Kakadot. Of course, your secret examples. At the same time, also, you also want to look at the Chinese in Lao as part of the larger Chinese system. What is that? We get into that later on. At the same time, you were caught in the larger movements also of security history. KU is also going back to world history. And lastly, was the 10-meter Davao, or the Chinese captivity to Davao Chinese and being real citizens. So what became? So this will be the larger framework. And it's important, at least the way Edward approached it was to look at it from Erie Googley. Okay. So the first period is maybe the Davao Chinese. In the Chinese came to Davao. I will hesitate from saying Davao came. It did not exist. They were Chinese in Davao. Okay. In their background, if you're looking at that period from the 1890s to the 1910s, this was the twilight years of the Qing Dynasty. Or you can try to be in art interpretation. It's currently called the century of liberation. So the Qing Dynasty was the last. It was the last dynasty of Chinese system. And this was a time when with all the colonial adventurers like the British, Japanese, the British, the Dutch, and the Germans, and the Japanese were starting to invade Kansas. But his history is also the open thing. So this was actually in England already his twilight years. The country was a city. So if you look at it from the point of view of the ordinary Chinese, what options did they have? They were poor, people silent care. So the only result was get out of the country. And so there was this mindset that we have to leave home because if the country is going into ruins. So you go out there to find your fortune. And these were children, Arthurs, super children. They were 15 years old, 16 years old, being sent out, right? And the basic message was, if you're not successful, don't come home. Right? Don't come back, you'll come us. So already it tells us a bit about the mindset of those who are out. I think now also that if we now focus in Davao, I think this is also the end of the Philippine War. Right? So Davao was like in Mindanao, Davao was separate territory from the Spanish areas until the 1850s when Jose Oyanguren ventured to settle in Davao. This was territory of Philippines. Okay. The settlement was supposed to set up farmland, trading posts, but it did not succeed. So essentially it was that It was only during the American period that Davao started to get subway. Were there Chinese in Davao at that time? Very, very few. Okay? Most of the Chinese were actually in Zamboanga, some Mokake, some Wakapoto, or the post areas. But in the Americans coming in, the main driver was actually the Abacate. So there's a very good book called titled The Abacate Frontier, that was one of my sources. But the data established why Davao existed in the first place. Now, with the establishment of trade, Chinese started coming. Initially, they were traders who were setting up trading outposts. Right? They would buy ahapa, centerpiece, and back. They would also act as money lender. In Spain, their home base was actually in areas like Dominque and other areas. In some ways, it was an academic intelligence network who's making money, who makes money, who earns the art plan, right? So those were some of the legal ones. But Abacate was also the driver. But also people around that time, the Japanese, it also came to Davao. There was a group of Japanese that had just finished within the Enongo Bifario. So that party had finished with what they decided to go back into family or to increase up with the Davao. So that's also a passion. Now, around this time, we had the very pioneers. Yusunga was actually a perpetrator, people, and when he heard that was that there was there's something about possibly opportunities, he decided to expand. There are more stories of people that are Buya, Anyoko. I'm that you ask those questions, they are out. But this is very good few Chinese in Davao until up till
Sangus Carta.
by 1918, we basically had Gerald less than council PTA, less than council training, 800. But it started from the 1930s and 30s was the start of move years. They grabbed up get by driven past. Apata is basic. That line was basically a lyrical part. They did so many others. Really strong, really even with them. Okay, there were 1,001 users for that. It was basically a war car. It was used to pathogens. So there was a huge demand for that. Moment bus cycle, but that was what didn't do it. Also take note that around from the 1920s to the 1930s, you had the rise of the capital of China. The Qing dynasty fell, Sun Yat-sen, met to establish the first the Chinese law. And so at that time, there was a bit more hope, right? We're now going to a more modern time. And so it was at that time, if you look at Davao, it was a weaver community again. And one big event was you had the Chinese consul come to visit community in Davao. And it was that visit by the Chinese consul in the Davao Chinese school, right, that was created as a meeting point. So the Chinese visit the consul was around 1980, right? And so, remember earlier on I said, people believe Davao mostly work in their city office. And now you have Davao as a industry, more businessmen, artisans, sealers, teachers, but there were also stowaways about let you ask a question later on.
really some there's some interesting, there's some really interesting stories out of that. But that one basically was becoming more involved by this day. And then there were also crime researchers. The Lannang, this it's from Krakow. This is also the start of Santa Ana as people's were supporting in So essentially good years. Comparatively, Chinese were still small. Okay? Around that time, Taiwan was the Japanese. So much so that the Philippine government was afraid of Japanese as well, about and practice. Okay? Because they were the Philippine monument, Philippine American, is basically afraid the Japanese will put in their powers. So this is around that time the Japanese seems to stop, or the Japanese taking over that also. But the war years, okay, remember that things would take, worldwide things were coming to a war. The Second World War, Jewish war like none. But in Davao, okay, we subject Davao felt it December 8th. December 8th. Just during that time, people were having a lot of mass because it was a feast of the Immaculate Conception. And when this happened to days like the 9th, 528 on period. Wow. I did note that you might think that December 8th as the Japanese invaded. No, the Japanese actually bombed areas of Santa Ana, but they were after the American ships, right? They did not land until December 10th. So, was that period, December 8th, December 10th? Who was there? And so this is around that time also, that the Philippine American governments spared the Japanese. They put it in competition. But, so in the meantime, you know, kita also the Davao community at that time. Normally, not really very there were a person that who will not, I mean, they were, at least they were supporting them. They supported them. As the pictures of the grand uncle of my leader, the grandfather of my wife, is speaking at that seems to be a so they were politically active, but their politics was actually towards not towards the Philippines, not towards that all. And yet, if you think about it, the Japanese were in the current topics, you a memory. So some of those Chinese, of course, some Japanese sniping the unit which was the company. Many of them left, and they practically just going up to Kapano, which is essentially now Papu area. They stayed there for the duration. Among them was the father of people. He stayed up there long. The place take vacation. But come there, so the before I pay you correctly to help write the book, I'll sit you like a Japanese and destroy it. Pretty long. They actually visiting a lot of the infrastructure. It was set to control actually to limit the movement of the Americans, because the Americans would not get back from the time. The Japanese didn't set up and so they tried to grow off during the Chinese. in a sense, some people would humble. Some people were talking to me. Some people were talking to me. This is the hard part. I think we don't power the C1 but some people were not able to pick up. The reactors people who were planted as operating first. So it is basically 3 years of partnership during the Japanese crew came from Japanese Grenada, and around 1945, of course, the airplanes started up.
So, what usually happens with American liberation is they tend to destroy
A lot of people to remove the AOC to the so basically double censorship is brought giving that part also was Sapa. Basically here you now have in the war military dashes or in the some techniques are involved in the they say that but really these are events happening because people so what happened post-war? There's these stories also. The story of Francisco Villa when he was not convinced or taken over by the Japanese show, his son-in-law, a lawyer, spent much of the post-war encountering the last street. In the terms of Nasik, not colors. And then this is also the time that many of the original Chinese pioneers also experienced their decline. So the story of Al Yongboy in me every day Al Yong to si tinalong to sa people's name but they were the two brothers. The elder brother was Ang Yongko, or ang folks picked up on the table. Also, what source of history exactly Portuguese army? And so he's being up in several of the few of and from there I can see that feels actually that Sir Big Brother is the Big Brother. The Google operates unfortunately, Ang Kyoto was murdered. The Satan, he started after the war. It's somewhere in Port Dominque. He was murdered in front of the sun. So Sarah, the residential reviews, sadly no. Okay. His son, si Jose Alonso at Tibo of Sonpo. The Sultan, it was the novel, one of the first Filipino Chinese novels. Unfortunately, not many people know. So the title of the book was Sultanate. This was published in the 19th century. And there we have a good account of the neighborhood of it's like a fictionalized story, so I don't know how much it's true, how cultural it is. It's imagination. But there, in the bottom thing, you can see bits of the dynamics of the furniture.
into time. Alright, sorry, please. So, this actually forced like the first year, yung Chinese coming in the Davao pre-war data around the start of the 19th there's some blowing out people that the war was like the solid dividing. Many of the Chinese were actually killed. Many of them were associated with the Al-Qaeda, and they were the chairman, members of the board, okay, who were marked as wanted men by the Japanese. Sorry, I don't remember all the names. I think it's important. This is the important to know that demarcate between many countries did take the suicide of the war. There were some families which were pitied. You can't just get lost. Some of those, many of the old Chinese, they still step years or have shooting go stuff. That's okay. They were not actually the businessmen. Maybe they were not all of them. They were faking very to the crack. Many of them were many of them were martyrs. There's an interesting story. Woman who came here looking for her husband. Yung ano na padala porta tayo si Maita. Okay. So those were some of the stories. But so post-war was actually another big deal because you had the construction of Davao, okay? You had the reconstruction of Davao, and money was important. Opportunities started coming. So it wasn't just the Chinese coming, it was actually us. It along Gerald because of opportunities. We're like all of the Republic of China. So Chiang Kai-shek, Taiwan, and then there also the rise of the people's republic that came around 9 people. But in China, in 1945, that they recruit 9 people and have on 9 people. There was still a bit of uncertainty, but people could still come and go in parts of that time. But by 1948, another curtain had fallen. But many of the Japanese from China at that time also escaped into China. And they come to the Philippines. Some came to the Philippines where we were in Indonesia, by Malaysia. And 46 very big object, right? We gained independence from the United States. New wave of migrants from the Philippines and Asia. So, for instance, for those who know, a light drum in Mexico came from Cebu, Oxford. So it was just an example that next week of Pompous. This is something that went on up to the 60s, 70s, to the 60s, even early 1970s. Then CCC, for example, family came from Symafranca. That they established and their first store here, City Commercial Center, here outside early on. But basically, he had people close to the ship. Okay, and that became another control. Pains for Chinese. That they were saying, you're not European citizens. So, some I think with some who go that Taiwanese not for. But it was a period of state discrimination because you had the retail law. They call it Weibon in the Chinese law, which basically restricted the Chinese from operating retail businesses. Case in point, for those who remember, it was a bus store report of Zion and Down. So in here, but then after that, after the retail plate law passed. But today, the Buddha said we had decision the rules. But there were other ways around that should incorporate the business part of it. Customer jogging. Unfortunately, there were some Chinese who had the working the citizens prior to that. Okay. But this is also around the same time. Here you had the Chinese, you had second generation Germans who were already coming of age in Davao. Many were born in the 1940s and going into the 1950s. So the mindset was already. So it's important to note because the Chinese, the Chinese who came to Davao, they were migrant workers, but their mentality was always make my money here, go back to life. That was always it. I will go back and think about the less in 1945, 40 years ago. The opportunity sounds. And we found many essentially stuck here.
There are also scientists in other parts of South Asia, Southeast Asia, anywhere Singapore and Malaysia. In some ways, although we face discrimination here, in some ways, we fare better because, for example, in Malaysia, it's almost like a wholesale operation. And not cast Chinese bread, Malaysia, Indonesians. In Malaysia, situation, these riots in the 1960s. But fortunately for us, we don't have them in some ways it was privacy. But the 1970s there were rewarding relations with the Philippines and Thailand. So once ago is very Egypt respectively was during this time Ferdinand Marcos Sr. Actually Gerald said master trip basically waiting to prepare for Chinese trip to the Philippines of the past. But around the same time, for asking about, you were also walking across like a market wall. So, eventually, those things did something. Those things will settle down. So yeah, about Chinese is now our MBK's death and our infiltrating society. Domestic migration continues. Many people will ask, what about the Tistas? What topic is like? They're actually a part of domesticating. So here you now have the Davao giving us businessmen, educators, scientists, artists, and also missionaries. More than in our book, beauty. And here we also have international vacations. Yadang Gyupo, I mentioned earlier. And Yadang Gyupo, the internationally regarded Thai harpers, also and national artists, mentioned as family was such a size. What about Lolin Samanil? Of course, everybody was Dominque, couple. The certain they said the school, but the father came to Davao, the family came to Davao in the 1950s. Eventually, he moved back to Many other Lannang battle guys is as far as purpose. You don't really know them. They're quite famous elsewhere. In the book we cover cite this Fred who's a well-known civilist thinker, he's a pioneer of military. Here. So basically, it's just a theory where might be solved.
So, to wrap this up, okay, hopefully this big.
I hope this helps put you bring stories of who they are in relation to their parents and their grandparents, to their parents and grandparents, where do they come from, how do people from that which parts of history and you should also this is preferred to explain that even ministers of background how did our experiences make us different? How do our experiences make us different from the Chinese?
My own story, I was closer to my grandfather, my father's side. So, we were very young. It's not about that. Wasn't until he responded, and it's just seems so. I mean, it's enough. I'm
Yeah. I know that he went back to China, moving. Not until I was part of his book did I realize what a kid he lived also. His parents, this was so, but he not visit this, that not serious happy in, but years, almost and I think for some old Chinese, that feel melody in that way. You're Chinese, go back to China. There's always that. Yeah, that when it's still possible for them now, it's just back. So I skip her now. You open the doors.
Pwede Bisaya ng kukutan natin. Tanto.
Hi. So I'm an Aklanon Lannang, and one of the issues that we have right now is that there's not that many of us to begin with, and most of us have never really met our Bakong Mama. So especially me, I'm really interested in how we could at least like bring their stories to life. So because I never met them, most of us never met them, how do you think we could start in doing the same thing as stories of our forefathers?
There is actually the book as a labor now. It's preserving our history. We want to share this with other generations. You have to be passionate. Just a little small or two. Maybe that's what started this book. Who do you see?
From Aklan, right?
Aklan, yes, Kalibo.
How big a community do you have?
Not that big. If we're going to put communities, there's only really one Chamber of Commerce, and then there's the Women's yung FFCCWO. That's pretty much it. Everyone, well, all communities would say everyone knows everybody, but that one very, very literal. I think there are about not even above 50 families. Though there's the Filipino-Chinese cemetery. There are, like I said, the communities. There are, actually, our family business is the one that approves the families who can bury people in the cemetery, but that's really it. Like, actually, my generation, they're not interested. I'm the only one. So it's a bit of a struggle. That's why actually I wanted to see how you guys did it. That's why I attended this panel. I was thinking, how can I bring that to my own community?
If you look at, Davao Chinese community is quite, it's not even that old actually. If you compare to Dilonzos, Dinoble is in fact the oldest. So Canapis Segel. One of the it's not one of it is like it started with the Spanish dragging them up then Alinanga, I think. So the entire Vinamta was outside the malls. Davao, for this, Sapoto is in, but we were gravitated towards Santa Ana Port because of the business activity in that area. So then here, the main city, the Sikadao, the whole part of the city is in San Carlo. That's where the original poetry, no, Kalana Sheta, Patete Batita, this Nabi, the surrounding areas, the mostly residents. That's how it started that one. It was during the time of the first conquistador, they arrived in 1860.
To add to that, we were fortunate to have some very dramatic stories that popped up So, on your side, there's an open thing. Number one is, start collecting, start writing the stories. One other lesson here is working with visuals. Fantastic. Siya. Nakapalaman sorry. Seriously, nakapalaman sorry. Or that is seen. Okay. So I think it's be research with that. And people start giving the anchors to some dramatic story, right? So much to that thing. People should be beautiful, right? At the same time, I think we have to ground it in your own what this is. Like how people what were the first people here, or not even the first people, even the stories. Start with that, like what brought unborn and not. Where did they come from? Where did they come from? And you know what? If you get better story from them, just make it back. Okay? Because another part is our own mythology. Because we don't tell it, we don't go enough, we don't tell enough people story.
What do you mean by making it up?
Make it up. Imagination. It could just be this, okay? If the story isn't that exciting, make it exciting. If people, the story is from one or two, if the story is from two people, then they have it.
It's a bit compositions answer, but
History is one thing, but history at the end of the day is the story. I also don't feel a lot about what I write in acting too. And it came from the stories of people around that this happened. So I just write it down. And I make it as Christmas.
I make the conspiracy time. But the important part is the storytelling.
What aspect, what anchor of the story of this book? Because
the area of Sichuan that we made on his uncle, Lannang. How after the war, before the war, they doesn't speak Yukonongas. And so when the families actually they give us like the atiak of the food. So they gave them their money, fuels for sick people. And put them in the seed box to be buried when somewhere in Santa Ana. And after the war, came back, still there, back so bakit sila, that's right. But that's a story, that's a dramatic, it's a dramatic news. It's a dramatic news there. Yeah. So that's an anchor. That's an anchor. We talk more about it.
Okay, well, thank you.
You know, a few months ago, I attended a talk in Siloy. It was a kaisa I forgot the name of the historian. He was a historian in the Philippine life who was portrayed in the Nagsa. But what he did was he went to Spain. And it turns out the archive of Spain, everything you can scan. Before you had to pay, now if you go there, you can scan, and you can scan, and you can online, you can access it for free. And so he was telling stories of how the Chinese were really the lighthouses. They were very skilled with the stones in areas where Filipinos didn't even support the Chinese yet. What is there of might in there? So, he also tried contacting this guy. He tried to scan as much as he could. I don't know if there are stories that fought in Antique or any your things. So you have some sort of brownie, some stories, right? You
That's a good start.
Research for people to China in place where the Filipino Chinese are, and there's a village there, and there's some documents that might be tied to at least for the past that you get updated, and then the past that you get okay, because I don't know.
I actually have an ancestral book, like the family ancestral book. I actually have it upstairs. I'll show it to sa inyo later. It's just that I can't read it. But I'm hoping that it can at least help me, would help point towards a certain direction, I guess. Because our community is small and it's honestly dying. In my generation, no one can speak it anymore. No one goes to, no one has ever attended the Lannang school because the Lannang school is 3 hours away. So I guess that's one of the reasons why I went to Lannang Archives, is because I want to be able to bring back Lannang culture in Aklan. And that's why I'm looking at stories on our forefathers, looking at different things to see what can I start with. What can I do to cement these stories and give them a place in the world? Thank you.
Keeping in mind, we can already pastor.
Just curious, who is the oldest person?
Yes, you will. Ang Xiaobi is truly one of the old guys. He became chief president of the Chinese school, chairman of the board of trustees of high school after the war. I can imagine top today, then 1945. I can still remember that time we interviewed Nancy, the daughter, I think. and he will be then say Catholic everywhere. So signed Dominque. He dies at 109 years old. His story, if I may, he arrived 1917, succeeded Benedicto Manila Associate as a first job was to play tickets in the movie house. And he went on to become the scene door, captain of the Manila Piers. Then later on, he went on to work for Japan Toramo. And that is where he did his purpose. After 10 years, he came to Davao. 1927, he arrived Davao, Davao.
Maybe there's some instances like, yeah, let's say,
Like, Tuning. Tuning was the first tailor to Davao. The corner of Namay Street. By it, it's now dressing shoes.
no, so, Ling Sailor.
Mas after here, the Paramount, the their Cantonese lost it. That all caused the beats. So,